You know, usually when we talk about a visionary film director, we expect their origin story to involve, I don't know, a childhood spent entirely in a dark movie theater.
Right, like the classic Hollywood prodigy.
Exactly. Or maybe like a precocious obsessive relationship with a Super 8 camera in their backyard. We generally expect this purely cinematic background.
Yeah, you expect them to speak the language of movies right from birth.
Totally. But then, you look at a filmmaker whose name has become literally synonymous in the cultural lexicon with guts, gore, and just these bizarre, gooey physical mutations.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you look at a guy whose defining cinematic image might be a man shoving a pulsating VHS tape into a bleeding vaginal slot that has spontaneously opened up in his own stomach.
Which is still shocking to watch today, by the way.
It really is. And you think, okay, well, this is a horror guy. This is a guy whose primary goal is to gross us out.
Yeah, the master of the midnight movie.
Right. But then you realize that this exact same filmmaker, working decades ago, somehow ended up perfectly predicting our modern 21st century relationship with technology, algorithms, and even our own biological identity.
It is the absolute definition of a perceptual paradox.
Yeah.
You go in expecting a late-night B-movie monster fest, and you walk out feeling like someone who's taken a sterile surgical scalpel to your entire understanding of modern life.
Yes, exactly. And that is exactly what we are doing today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Today, we are immersing ourselves in the work, the mind, and the genuinely terrifying prophecies of David Cronenberg.
It's going to be a wild ride.
It really is. We're using this incredibly comprehensive, frankly brilliant analytical text titled The New Flesh, the clinical vision of David Cronenberg as the foundation for our conversation today.
And it is a fantastic source text.
Oh, it's so good. And our mission here is to move far, far beyond that limiting, inadequate label of body horror. Because, calling him a body horror director is like calling a neurosurgeon a flesh cutter.
Right, it just completely misses the entire point.
It does. So we are going to explore the biology, the philosophy, and the 60-year career of a man who saw the future of human technology and flesh converging long before anyone else even had a dial-up modem.
Yeah, and that overarching theme is just so crucial to establish right up front, just so that as you listen to this, you have the right framework in mind.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Well, Cronenberg isn't just trying to scare you. If you just watch his films waiting for the monster to jump out of the closet, you are entirely missing the architecture of what he's building.
Yeah, he's not making slasher films.
Exactly. He is fundamentally examining what happens when the boundary between our physical selves, our flesh, our biology, our skin, and the outside world completely dissolves.
Wow.
Yeah, he's looking at the permeability of the human form.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that idea of a permeable human form sounds a little abstract, maybe a little academic.
Sure, it can sound like theory.
Right, but it is actually the most intimately relevant concept to every single person listening right now. We are going on a journey that will fundamentally rearrange how you view your own relationship with the screens, the devices, and the tech you hold in your hand every single day.
And you absolutely should care about this right now, today, more than ever.
Oh, totally.
Because just take a step back and think about the world we are currently living in.
Yeah.
We live in a world of wearable tech that constantly monitors our biology.
Right, our heart rates, our sleep cycles, our blood oxygen, all of it.
Exactly. And we live in a world governed by hyper-advanced attention-hijacking algorithms that deliberately rewire our dopamine receptors just to keep us scrolling.
It's literally changing our brain chemistry.
It is. And we are currently having very real, very serious legislative and ethical debates over genetic editing, CRISPR, and neurological enhancements like brain-computer interfaces.
Which is just wild to think about.
We are blurring the lines between biological intelligence and artificial intelligence on a daily basis. And everything we are wrestling with today on the front pages of tech journals, Cronenberg saw coming in the 1970s and 80s.
That's the part that blows my mind.
Yeah, he wasn't just making horror. He was actively diagnosing the future.
Which brings us to the origin of that diagnostic lens. To understand how he built this prophetic vision, we have to look at his roots in what the source text calls the Toronto mind.
Ah, yes, the Toronto mind.
So David Paul Cronenberg was born in Toronto in 1943. And when you look at his childhood home, it sounds like this fascinating, perfectly balanced incubator for the exact kind of art he would go on to make.
It really does. It's a perfect storm of influences.
Right. His mother, Esther, was a pianist. So you have the arts, the aesthetic, the emotional resonance of music right there in the living room.
Yeah, that emotional core is there.
But then his father, Milton, was a journalist, an avid reader who filled the house floor to ceiling with books.
So it was an environment that naturally bridged the analytical factual world and the aesthetic emotional world.
Exactly.
And that duality produced an intellectual who simply didn't see the sciences and the humanities as opposing territories. To him, they were continuous.
They were just different languages used to describe the exact same phenomenon.
Yes, exactly. And you really see this manifest when he gets to the University of Toronto in the 1960s. He didn't start in a film program.
Nope.
He didn't even start in English literature.
Yeah.
He started his university career in a rigorous science program with a serious, dedicated, hands-on interest in biology and biochemistry.
He was literally in the labs.
He was. He was looking through microscopes. He came very close to pursuing a full-time career in the natural sciences before he eventually shifted his major to English literature.
And that pivot from biochemistry to literature is everything. I actually look at it this way, and tell me if you agree. Comparing his shift from biology to English isn't really a change in career path or a change in his core interest. He was essentially studying the exact same subject, the human condition, the organism.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
He just zoomed out, right. He went from looking through the eyepiece of a microscope at cellular mutation and organelle structures, and he zoomed out to the macro level of human drama, human narratives, and societal structures.
Yeah, he didn't change the subject. He just changed the lens he was using to examine the specimen.
Yes.
That is precisely it. And what's fascinating here is what that foundational scientific education actually gave him as an artist.
Right, because it wasn't just subject matter.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Though, obviously, studying biochemistry gave him the rich, highly specific vocabulary of parasitology, cellular mutation, and viewing the body as a systemic chemical machine.
Which he uses constantly.
Constantly. But what it gave him primarily was a way of thinking, a highly specific methodology for observing the world. It gave him clinical detachment.
Okay, clinical detachment. I want to pause on that because it's a huge concept for his work.
It is the defining concept, really.
So explain what that actually looks like in practice when he's sitting in the director's chair making a movie.
Well, think about how a biologist looks at a cell mutating under a microscope.
Okay.
A biologist does not look at a cellular mutation and immediately start screaming in terror.
Right, they don't run out of the room.
No, and they don't look at a virus multiplying and classify it as morally evil or good. A mutation is just a fact of organic life. It's a mechanism.
It just is what it is.
Exactly. Some mutations are adaptive and help an organism survive. Some are lethal and destroy the host. And some eventually create entirely new species over millions of years.
Mm.
But the biologist just observes the phenomenon without moral judgment. They document it.
They just write down what the cell is doing.
Yes. And Cronenberg brought that exact, precise clinical detachment to his directing. When he shows you something horrifying on screen, a body tearing itself apart, a grotesque new organ growing out of someone's chest, he presents it as something that requires understanding, not immediate moral condemnation.
That's so different from normal horror.
It is, and this is the absolute genius of his approach. The observer's distance doesn't erase the horror for the audience. It actually compounds it.
Because it leaves you alone with it.
Yes. You find yourself carefully, rationally comprehending and analyzing something that you were instinctively supposed to just be repelled by.
Because in a normal horror movie, the music swells, the camera shakes, and you were given permission to just scream and look away.
Right. The movie tells you, this is the bad guy, hate him.
But Cronenberg doesn't do that.
He holds the camera steady and says, look at this organism, look at what it's becoming.
Yeah.
You can't just write it off as a monster. You have to reckon with it as a biological reality.
Which perfectly explains his early experimental work. Between 1966 and 1970, while he's still embedded in that university environment, he starts making these underground shorts and features.
Yeah, he was incredibly prolific early on.
You have titles like Transfer, From the Drain, and then these two incredibly strange, fascinating feature-length works, Stereo in 1969 and Crimes of the Future in 1970.
The original Crimes of the Future.
Right, right. And what blows my mind is that by the time he is 26 years old, his entire suite of obsessions is fully formed.
It's all there.
He's shooting these films in this stark, clinical black and white, Crimes of the Future, the 1970 version, Doesn't even use normal dramatic dialogue between characters.
It's totally unconventional.
He strips that away and just uses a dry, clinical voiceover like someone reading a medical journal out loud.
Which is brilliant.
He's already obsessed with body modification. He's obsessed with the bizarre bureaucratization of transgression-like government agencies designed to manage weird sexual fetishes and how pathology shapes human behavior.
It's all laid out on the table before he's even 30.
But the real explosion, the decisive leap where he takes this clinical university mind and drops it right into commercial genre cinema, that happens in 1975 with Shivers.
Ugh, Shivers. Also released under the incredibly evocative title, They Came From Within.
Such a great title.
It really is. This was his first commercially distributed feature film. And a key, fascinating detail here from the source text is that it was actually funded in part by the Canadian Film Development Corporation.
Wait, really? Taxpayer money?
Yes. Taxpayer money helped fund this vision. And the premise of Shivers is pure, distilled, unadulterated Cronenberg.
Set the scene for us.
So it is set in a luxury, brutalist, ultra-modern apartment complex called Starliner Island. It's totally self-contained. It has its own grocery store, its own dentist, its own clinic. It is essentially a giant concrete petri dish.
It's the perfect controlled environment for an experiment.
Precisely. And in this complex, a rogue scientist designs an artificial parasite. His twisted logic is that modern humanity has become too rational, too repressed, and he wants to design a biological agent to liberate human beings from their sexual repression.
Which is just a crazy premise.
It is. But of course, the parasite gets loose. It begins infecting the residents, and it turns these polite, middle-class professionals into violently hypersexual, utterly uninhibited maniacs.
And the parasite itself is visually shocking.
Oh, it is overtly, undeniably phallic. It looks like a giant, fleshy slug, and it spreads primarily through sexual contact or by violently forcing itself into the host's mouth.
Disgusting.
Yeah, and the movie ends with the infected residents, who now operate almost like a unified orgiastic hive, mind calmly driving their cars out of the underground parking garage of the apartment complex, heading out into the wider world of Montreal to spread the condition globally.
And people absolutely lost their minds over this movie. We aren't just talking about a few bad reviews in the local paper.
No, the critical outrage was unprecedented.
Robert Fulford, who was a major, highly respected cultural critic writing in the Saturday Review at the time, famously called the film a disgrace to Canadian cinema.
He hated it.
He really did. It escalated to the point where there were literal heated debates in the Canadian Parliament about whether government funding should have been used to make a movie this depraved. It was a massive national controversy.
It was a cultural firestorm. But in retrospect, that intense vitriolic controversy was the most reliable, undeniable signal that Cronenberg was onto something profoundly real.
See, I want to jump in here because I think the nature of that outrage is the ultimate proof of concept for his clinical approach.
How so?
Well, if people were just traditionally scared by a monster movie, they would have brushed it off. Think about it. If you go see a movie about a giant radioactive lizard stepping on buildings, you might be thrilled, you might be scared in the dark, but you go home, you eat a sandwich, and you sleep fine.
Right, you don't panic about the lizard.
Exactly. You don't write to your member of parliament about the lizard. But because people were so deeply, viscerally provoked by Shivers, it means Cronenberg didn't just scare them. He touched a raw, unprotected nerve in the culture.
He definitely did.
He was actively poking at the concept of domestic containment. He was poking at middle-class, repressed sexuality, at the absolute terrifying fragility of polite, civilized society.
Yeah, that's exactly what he was doing.
He held up his clinical microscope to human repression, and polite society absolutely hated what it saw squirming on the slide.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. It wasn't the fake blood that offended the politicians and the critics. It was the biological inevitability of the premise.
Right.
He was looking at these people in their tailored suits and their sterile, modern apartments, and he was telling them that their polite society was an illusion, that they were just one microscopic parasite away from total, uninhibited, animalistic collapse.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And that biological framework, that clinical lens we've been discussing, it wasn't just a phase he went through as a young provocateur in the 70s. It became a unified, rigorous, 60-year philosophical system.
Right, which brings us to the absolute core of his entire career. If you want to understand any David Cronenberg film, from the gooey horrors of the 80s to the grounded mob thrillers of the 2000s, you have to understand his central unifying thesis.
And that thesis has a name.
It does. Cronenberg is not the kind of director who radically changes his fundamental worldview from film to film.
No, he's incredibly consistent.
He isn't a chameleon who just hops between disconnected genres. He has been working a consistent, highly refined set of ideas from different angles using different narratives across 6 decades. And the organizing concept, the name for this unified philosophy, is the new flesh.
The new flesh.
The new flesh. It's a term he explicitly coins and uses later in his 1983 film Videodrome, but as you look closely at his filmography, it is the skeleton key to his entire body of work, both forward into the future and backward into his early experiments.
Absolutely.
So let's break this down for the listener. What is the new flesh exactly?
Well, at its core, it is the profound, unsettling belief that the boundary between our biological bodies, our meat, our organs, our skin, and our technological external environment is not a fixed, impenetrable wall.
It's not a fortress.
Exactly. It's not a permanent enclosure.
Right.
Instead, the human flesh is a permeable membrane. It is constantly porous. It is capable of radical mutation.
It's always shifting.
Right. It is capable of physically incorporating technology, media, and external trauma into itself, it being completely physically reshaped by that incorporation.
And importantly, the philosophy of the new flesh is not presented as a dystopian, finger-wagging warning.
Oh, not at all.
Nor is it presented as a utopian transhumanist dream. It is presented simply as an unavoidable biological fact.
Yes, the body is already changing. The technology is already inside us. The evolutionary train has already left the station.
So true.
The question he poses in his films isn't whether this merging of tech and flesh will happen, but rather, what are we going to make of it when it does? How will it feel?
And this is where that scientific training from the University of Toronto becomes so philosophically crucial.
Exactly.
Because remember, the biologist doesn't classify a mutation as inherently good or bad.
Right.
Cronenberg approaches the mutations of the human body, whether they are caused by a rogue television signal, by an experimental surgery, by a teleportation accident, or by a traumatic, violent event, in exactly that clinical spirit.
He doesn't judge it.
No, he doesn't tell the audience to celebrate the change, and he doesn't tell the audience to mourn it. He simply holds the camera still and asks you to look at it.
And I love that you mentioned how it feels, because I always try to ground the idea of the new flesh in how modern humans operate today right now.
Oh, please do.
Think about how you, the listener, feel when you leave your house, get 5 minutes down the road, and realize you accidentally left your smartphone on the kitchen counter.
Instant panic.
Right. Think about the physical reaction your body has.
Yeah.
Your heart rate genuinely spikes. You feel a flush of anxiety. You keep involuntarily patting your empty pocket.
Oh, yeah, I do that all the time.
It genuinely, neurologically feels like a phantom limb. You feel physically incomplete. Technology is already inside us psychologically. It has fundamentally altered our neurology, our dopamine loops, and our physical habits.
We hunch over, our thumbs move differently.
Exactly. Cronenberg just took that psychological reality that we are already cyborgs and made it literal, visceral, bleeding flesh on the movie screen.
It is a profound realization. And to really understand how he achieves this deeply unsettling feeling on screen, we have to look at the mechanics of his filmmaking.
The formal aesthetic choices.
Right, because the philosophy of the new flesh generates every single specific cinematic choice he makes, from the lighting to the music.
It's a total package.
So let's start with the visual language. His films look incredibly uniquely clinical. For over 20 years, across 14 different films, he worked with the same brilliant cinematographer, Peter Soshitsky.
And together, they created a visual look that feels almost like a medical documentary in its stark detachment.
Let's get into the specifics of that look. What are they actually doing with the camera and the lights?
It's highly controlled. There's a frequent use of cold color temperatures, stark whites, sterile blues, the fluorescent lighting you would expect to see in a hospital corridor or a morgue, rather than the warm, gothic shadows you usually see in horror films.
It's very sterile.
And crucial to this is the camera movement. The camera is almost always static or moving with extremely smooth, controlled, objective precision.
It doesn't shake.
No, there is a total deliberate absence of that shaky, handheld camera urgency that almost every other horror director uses.
Let's translate why that matters for a second, because usually a horror director wants to create subjective identification.
Right, they want you to feel what the character's feeling.
They put the camera on the operator's shoulder, they shake it around, they want you to feel like you are inside the character's panic, running blindly through the dark woods with them, breathing heavy.
Exactly. The shaky camera tells the audience, you are the victim, be terrified.
But Cronenberg entirely refuses to do that.
Right. When he shows you a horrific transformation or a bizarre mutation or a sudden act of brutal violence, the camera does not flinch. It is locked down on a tripod.
It just stares.
It does not suddenly cut away to a shadow on the wall to spare your feelings. The camera maintains its cold, clinical distance, which forcibly places the audience into the role of clinical observers, or medical students sitting in an amphitheater watching a surgery.
Yes.
You are expected to look at exactly what you are looking at, rather than being given the cinematic permission to avert your eyes.
And that clinical, unblinking philosophy extends directly into his legendary practical effects. He collaborated for years with some of the greatest makeup and effects artists in the history of cinema, people like Rick Baker and Chris Wallace.
Absolute legends.
And the rule for a Cronenberg film was always the same. Transformations are never quick, magical, monster movie spectacles.
No poof of smoke.
Right. It's not like the classic werewolf movie where the guy looks up at the full moon, there's a quick dissolve edit, a bunch of fake hairs glued to his face, and suddenly he's a howling beast.
No. In Cronenberg's world, transformations are painfully slow.
They are agonizingly anatomically specific. They are documented step by step, exactly like a worsening terminal medical condition.
It's protracted. It is witnessed in stages. You see the skin stress, you see the asymmetrical tumors form, you see the bodily fluid change consistency.
It's so visceral.
And this clinical approach is even reflected in his architectural choices, which is something people often miss.
Oh, talk about the architecture.
Well, the exterior world, nature, sweeping landscapes, they barely exist in a classic Cronenberg film. You rarely see a beautiful forest or a wide-open desert.
That's true. I never thought about that.
Almost all of his spaces are highly controlled, built interiors. Luxury high-rise apartments, sterile gynecological clinics, windowless television studios, claustrophobic hotel rooms.
They feel very trapped.
Philosophically, this is deeply coherent because in his cinema, the human body is the landscape. The drama takes place upon the topography of the flesh. The built spaces around the characters function as externalizations of their interior psychology.
So the rooms reflect their minds.
Exactly. The spaces feel like human minds made architectural. They are suffocating, highly controlled, and always teetering on the absolute edge of biological contamination.
And we absolutely cannot talk about the aesthetic of The New Flesh without talking about the music. For 25 years, he partnered with the legendary composer Howard Shore.
Another absolute legend.
And Shore didn't just write scary music. He created an entirely unique, deeply unsettling tonal environment for Cronenberg's films. Shore used what we can describe as an unusual harmonic language to create a profound sense of biological wrongness.
Let's break down what biological wrongness sounds like musically.
Yes, please.
Shore avoided traditional melodic resolutions. He frequently used dissonant chord clusters, atonal string arrangements, and low brooding brass that almost mimics the sound of heavy breathing or a slowed-down heartbeat.
It feels very organic.
It does. He would blend the organic sounds of a traditional orchestra with early, cold electronic synthesizers, so the listener's ear couldn't quite distinguish what was man-made machinery and what was organic instrumentation.
It literally sounds like cells dividing out of control.
Yes. The music never swells in a traditional heroic way to tell you when to feel triumphant, and it doesn't do a sudden loud sting to tell you when to jump. It just drones and shifts, leaving your emotions totally unresolved, restless, and deeply uneasy.
Which raises an incredibly important point about the acting in these films. When you combine the cold lighting, the static camera, the agonizing makeup, and this dissonant music, it forces the actors to work in a very specific, highly unusual register.
It really does. Not standard acting.
They have to be emotionally available to the audience, but they cannot be demonstratively theatrical. They can't act like normal horror movie victims.
Right.
Look at James Woods' performance in Videodrome. He has to play a man who is actively descending into a state of perpetual, bizarre physical hallucination. But he doesn't just run around screaming in terror or crying in confusion.
He's weirdly calm about it.
Yeah, he performs the experience of being inside the terror, but treating it with this strange, flat acceptance.
It is an extraordinarily difficult acting challenge. It is the performance equivalent of Cronenberg's camera. The actor must maintain a sort of detached curiosity while being completely immersed in horrific circumstances.
It was just so unnatural.
In a standard horror film, the monster jumps out, the actor screams, the audience screams. It's a simple, comforting loop of cause and effect.
Right.
But Cronenberg asks his actors to experience a total, literal unraveling of their physical reality, and to treat it with a kind of baffled curiosity or even an involuntary psychosexual appetite.
It requires such an incredible suppression of normal human instinct. You have to untrain yourself as an actor. You can't rely on your fight or flight reflexes.
Exactly. And the character of Max Wren, played by James Woods in Videodrome, is the ultimate perfect manifestation of this acting style.
Which brings us perfectly to the year Cronenberg deployed his philosophy to essentially predict the entire trajectory of the 21st century.
Yes, 1983.
Let's jump into the prophecies of the screen. We are looking closely at the year 1983. In this single year, Cronenberg released two major films, Videodrome and The Dead Zone.
Two very different films, but deeply connected.
Let's start with Videodrome because this is the film that many scholars and fans consider his absolute theoretical masterpiece.
Without a doubt.
The premise alone is legendary and disturbing. James Woods plays Max Wren, who is the sleazy, opportunistic president of this small-time UHF cable TV channel in Toronto called Civic TV.
He's a great character. Very slimy.
Very slimy. Max is a guy who is always hunting for extreme, margin-pushing, softcore content to boost his ratings. Through an illegal satellite dish setup, his technician intercepts a pirated, untraceable broadcast signal coming from somewhere in the ether.
And the show is simply called Videodrome.
And the broadcast is nothing but raw, unsimulated, extreme torture and violence taking place in a bright orange windowless room. There is no plot, there is no narrative, there are no characters, just the pure, brutal acts.
And Max, being a creature of media consumption, becomes intensely obsessed with it. He wants to license it. He wants to broadcast it.
He sees dollar signs.
Exactly. But then the hallucinations begin. However, remember the rules of the new flesh in Cronenberg's world. Hallucinations are never safely contained just in the mind. They inevitably become physical, biological reality.
They bleed into the real world.
Quite literally. Max's television set literally starts to bulge, breathe, and pulse with veins like a living respiratory organ.
So gross.
And then most famously, a gaping vaginal slot opens up in Max's own abdomen. He begins literally inserting specialized VHS cassettes directly into his own body, and these tapes physically reprogram his mind and his behavior.
I mean, just the imagery alone is iconic.
Later, his hand literally fuses with a handgun, metal and flesh, melting together to become one indistinguishable biomechanical weapon. The boundary between reality, media transmission, and physical hallucination completely collapses.
It's mind-bending. And what's so brilliant is that this isn't just weird imagery for the sake of being weird. This is the literalization of the famous Canadian media theorist Marshall McLuhan.
The medium is the message.
Yes. McLuhan is famous for that phrase. Let's translate that. McLuhan argued that the actual physical technology of a medium, whether that's the printing press, television, or today, the internet, shapes human consciousness and society much more profoundly than whatever specific content is being broadcast on it.
Right, it's the structure of the tech that matter.
The fact that you are staring at a glowing box in your living room changes your brain more than whether you are watching the news or a sitcom.
That's a huge point.
And Cronenberg takes that high-level academic theory and makes it drippingly, terrifyingly literal. The television doesn't just transmit ideas that mildly affect Max's opinions. The television physically, violently incorporates itself into the flesh of its consumer.
The physical body is reformed by the technology it regularly uses. And the film makes this connection to McLuhan incredibly explicitly clear through a character named Brian Oblivion.
What a name.
Right. Oblivion is a media philosopher within the film who bears a striking intellectual resemblance to McLuhan. But Oblivion refuses to exist in the physical world. He will not meet anyone in person.
Never.
He only communicates, even to his own daughter, through an extensive library of pre-recorded television segments. He exists purely as an electronic signal. And Oblivion argues passionately that the television screen is no longer just a piece of furniture. It is the retina of the mind's eye.
He's a true believer.
He argues that the body's physical transformation through its constant contact with media isn't a disease or a deterioration, but a necessary evolutionary upgrade for the human species.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I want to stop right here. Brian Oblivion isn't just a weird 1980s sci-fi concept. When I look at the character of Brian Oblivion, I see the absolute very first conceptualization of a virtual influencer.
Oh, that's a brilliant connection.
Think about people today who live entirely through highly curated, filtered avatars on social media, People who have millions of followers, who shape culture, but whose actual physical reality in an apartment somewhere is completely detached from their glowing digital transmission.
They are essentially disembodied.
Oblivion represents every modern influencer, every TikTok personality, every avatar who lives entirely in the transmission and has no other meaningful physical self.
It's a spot-on comparison. And the terrifying modern relevance of Videodrome only grows deeper the more you analyze the mechanics of the plot.
Break it down for us.
Think about what Cronenberg actually made in 1983. He made a film about a rogue, untraceable pirate signal that deploys deliberately shocking, hyper-violent, emotionally provocative content for the specific purpose of rewiring the neurological architecture of the consuming mind.
Okay, yes.
It is designed to create an addiction loop. That is the exact, precise, functional precursor to the attention hijacking algorithms currently operating at scale on billions of users right now on social media platforms.
Wow, yes. The algorithm feeds you outrage.
It feeds you outrage to keep your eyes on the screen, which rewires your dopamine pathways. 30 years before the modern algorithmic internet became our unavoidable daily reality, Cronenberg identified the exact logic that our technological future would follow.
But I have to offer a major pushback on Brian Oblivion's whole philosophical argument about this being an upgrade.
Okay, let's hear it.
Oblivion calmly says this integration with the screen is human evolution. It's the next step. But if the television broadcast physically alters Max's body against his will, if it forcibly inserts tapes into his stomach, if it turns his hand into a fleshy gun that he can't control, is that actually evolution?
That's a very fair question.
Or is the technology operating exactly like a hostile parasite? Isn't the Videodrome signal just a technological electronic version of the biological slug parasite from Shivers?
Oh, interesting.
It infects the host, it entirely overrides their free will, and it uses their body to spread the infection or carry out an agenda. Evolution implies a natural adaptation for the sake of the organism's survival. What happens to Max Wren feels like pure, violent colonization of the flesh by an external force.
That is the exact brilliant tension that Cronenberg deliberately refuses to resolve for the viewer.
He leaves you hanging.
He does. He lets Oblivion's high-minded argument for technological evolution coexist, entirely unrefuted, right alongside the evident, visceral, bloody horror of what is actually happening to Max Wren's physical body.
He does not adjudicate between them. He doesn't tell you who is right. He just presents the collision. And it is incredibly illuminating to contrast this eager embrace of mutation with the other film he released in that exact same year, 1983, The Dead Zone.
Right, The Dead Zone. This is an adaptation of a famous Stephen King novel, and on the surface, it feels way more conventional, almost like a traditional Hollywood thriller.
Yeah, it's very accessible.
It stars Christopher Walken as Johnny Smith. Johnny is this incredibly sweet, mild-mannered schoolteacher in a small town. He gets into a terrible car accident, falls into a deep coma for 5 years, and finally wakes up.
But he wakes up different.
Right, he wakes up with a curse.
Yeah.
Due to the brain trauma, whenever he physically touches someone, just skin-to-skin contact, he has these violent, vivid, uncontrollable visions of their past, their secrets, or their future.
It's overwhelming for him.
He can also see these things he calls dead zones, which are unwritten, contingent pathways in the future that he has the power to change. Now, on the surface, the dead zone lacks the overt, gooey, physical body horror of Videodrome. There are no vaginal stomach slots here.
Right. It's pretty clean visually.
But conceptually, it is absolutely a Cronenberg film at its core. Because Johnny's physical body, his neurology, has been fundamentally altered by a physical trauma that he didn't choose and cannot reverse.
The mutation is internal.
Yes. His physical flesh, his basic human sense of touch, has been transformed into a traumatic source of unwanted revelation. His body forces him to know things about the world and about other people that his mind desperately wishes it didn't have to carry.
It makes him a tragic figure. And the entire climax of the film hinges on this horrific, involuntary knowledge. Johnny attends a political rally and shakes hands with a rising populist political candidate named Greg Stilson, played with terrifying charisma by Martin Sheen.
It's a great performance.
And the moment their skin touches, Johnny has a crystal-clear apocalyptic vision that Stilson's future leadership will result in him triggering a catastrophic, world-ending nuclear war.
And here, we must impartially note how the analysis frames this political dynamic based on the source text.
Go ahead.
Stilson is depicted as a classic demagogue, a populist candidate who masterfully deploys outrage, folksy charm, and pure spectacle to work a crowd into a frenzy.
Very recognizable trope.
Exactly. The text notes he is demonstrably psychologically unfit for the immense power of the office he is pursuing, and his underlying instincts in a genuine crisis run immediately toward catastrophic authoritarian violence rather than diplomacy.
Right, that's how the text analyzes the character.
It's also noted that while Cronenberg made the film in 1983 during the Cold War anxieties of the first Reagan term, the film is absolutely not about one specific isolated political moment.
It's broader than that.
Yes, it is about a recurring, dangerous political archetype that continues to generate fresh, recognizable analogs across different decades and different countries. The profound ethical question the film asks is, what obligation falls upon the isolated individual who can clearly see the disaster coming that the rest of society cannot or will not see?
It's a heavy burden. And the contrast between the two Cronenberg protagonists from the year 1983 is just incredible to think about.
It's a stark contrast.
You have Max Wren in Videodrome, who gleefully, hungrily descends into the new flesh. He has a psychosexual appetite for the mutation. He wants the extreme experience of merging with the machine.
He welcomes it.
And then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have Johnny Smith in the Dead Zone, who is fundamentally gentle. He actively retreats from all human connection. He is forced into total agonizing isolation because the very biological capacity that is supposed to link him to other human beings and the simple comfort of physical touch is destroying his sanity.
They are two sides of the exact same philosophical coin. What happens to a human being when your mutated body gives you access to more reality than your conscious mind can bear?
It's a perfect encapsulation of his thematic range. And while Videodrome and The Dead Zone tackled our relationship with mass media, technology, and political prophecy, Cronenberg soon applied his clinical, unblinking lens to a profoundly intimate personal tragedy.
A huge shift in tone.
He asked, what happens when biological mutation doesn't come from a TV screen, but from an illness that takes away the person you love? Which leads us to the tragedy of transformation, looking closely at The Fly and Dead Ringers.
Oh, The Fly.
Released in 1986. This is the movie that truly made David Cronenberg a household name. It was a massive mainstream commercial hit. It won an Academy Award for its groundbreaking makeup effects, but amazingly, it did not compromise his clinical, philosophical vision one single bit.
Not at all.
It stars Jeff Goldblum in a career-defining performance as Seth Brundle, a brilliant, eccentric, but kind of socially awkward scientist who independently invents teleportation pods in his loft apartment.
The telepods.
Right. He successfully tests the pod on inanimate objects, then on an animal, and finally, in a moment of drunken hubris, he tests it on himself. But he doesn't realize that a common housefly has flown into the pod with him just before the doors close.
The ultimate mistake.
The computer gets confused by the two life forms, and it fuses their DNA together at the subatomic level. And slowly, horrifyingly, Seth begins to change.
And, the emotional architecture of this film is what elevates it from a gross-out monster movie to a genuine cinematic masterpiece.
It's so emotional.
The practical effects by Chris Wallace are astonishing, and they are presented with that signature Cronenbergian clinical attention to biological detail.
Oh.
But the gore only carries overwhelming emotional weight because of how the first act of the screenplay is meticulously structured.
Talk about that structure.
Well, the film spends a significant, crucial amount of time making sure you, the audience, fall deeply, genuinely in love with Seth Brundle as a human being before his physical deterioration even begins.
Which is so rare for a horror movie.
The romance between Seth and a science journalist named Veronica Quaife, played brilliantly and empathetically by Gina Davis, is so specific, so intelligent, and so tender. They have witty banter, they have deep insecurity.
Do you really care about them?
By the time the genetic mutation starts taking hold, you are completely emotionally invested in Seth. You don't want him to be a monster, you want him to be okay.
Which makes his physical destruction absolutely unbearable to watch. You aren't watching a villain get defeated, you are watching a good man rot away. It's a tragedy.
It truly is.
And it's impossible to talk about The Fly without discussing how it was received at the time. In 1986, and continually ever since, The Fly has been widely read and analyzed as a devastating, heartbreaking allegory for the AIDS epidemic, which was ravaging the world at that exact moment.
Yes, the parallels are undeniable.
Now, Cronenberg hasn't explicitly confirmed that it was a direct, intentional one-to-one AIDS allegory, but the metaphor aligns with terrifying perfection. It tracks the specific, agonizing phenomenology of a terminal illness.
So,
You have the initial period of apparent enhancement. Right after the teleportation, Seth initially feels incredibly strong, hyper-energetic, sexually potent. He thinks the machine purified him.
false dawn.
Right. But then that euphoria gives way to early confusing symptoms. Odd, coarse hairs growing out of a wound, skin lesions, and finally, the crushing, inescapable realization that the transformation is lethal, aggressive, and entirely irreversible. It's so sad.
The film perfectly, tragically captures the caretaker's profound anguish as Veronica tries to help him, the patient's initial angry denial, and the heartbreaking reality of how extreme physical decay slowly, inevitably dissolves the bonds of intimate love.
It is a profoundly moving allegory. But it's important to argue that reading it only as a specific allegory for a specific disease actually undersells the broader philosophical depth of the film.
Tell me more about that.
The Fly works as a direct, unblinking philosophical examination of what physical transformation does to our core identity. It asks the terrifying question: at what point does a radically changed self have so little continuity with its predecessor that we can no longer honestly call it the same person?
The ship of Theseus, but with flesh.
Exactly. Seth realizes with his scientist's mind that he isn't just dying of a disease, he is metamorphosing into something new. Brundlefly, he calls it. But whatever insectoid creature emerges from that metamorphosis won't have Seth's compassion or Seth's love for Veronica.
It will just be an insect. It will just be an insect governed by instinct. The film explores exactly where transformation ends and complete extinction of the self begins, not through dry abstract philosophy, but through the visceral, gooey reality of changing flesh.
And Jeff Goldblum's performance captures every single ounce of that complexity. He doesn't just play a growling monster. Sure. He maintains this heartbreaking, hyper-articulate gallows humor right up until his vocal cords literally dissolve.
That gallows humor is so important.
There's this unforgettable, deeply sad scene where his body parts are literally falling off, his fingernails are peeling away, his teeth are dropping out into the sink, his ears detach, and instead of just screaming, he starts meticulously storing these dead pieces of himself in his bathroom medicine cabinet.
The museum.
He detachedly, almost scientifically, refers to the cabinet as his Museum of Natural History. I can't help but compare Seth's desperate cataloging of his decaying body to how people today use the internet and social media.
Oh, how so?
You see people going online to morbidly, obsessively document their own physical or mental decline, posting daily updates of their trauma for an audience. It's a modern coping mechanism through clinical observation.
Wow.
The logic is, if I can put my trauma behind glass, if I can give it a clinical label, if I can turn it into content, maybe it won't entirely destroy me.
That is a brilliant modern parallel. It is the desperate human attempt to assert intellectual control over completely uncontrollable biological chaos.
Exactly.
And if The Fly is Cronenberg's ultimate statement on the tragedy of external biological mutation, the film he made 2 years later, Dead Ringers in 1988, is his ultimate statement on the tragedy of internal psychological mutation.
A completely different kind of horror.
Many serious cinematic scholars consider Dead Ringers to be Cronenberg's absolute, undisputed masterpiece.
It is a chilling, perfect film. Jeremy Irons plays a dual role, playing identical twin gynecologists Beverly and Elliot Mantle.
And he is flawless in both roles.
Flawless. They are brilliant, they are wealthy, they are celebrated in their field, but their relationship to each other and to the outside world is profoundly, fundamentally disturbed. They share absolutely everything, including their medical practice, their apartment, and covertly, the women they seduce.
Which is incredibly dark.
Elliot is the confident, suave, predatory twin who seduces the women, and then midway through the affair, he covertly passes them over to his sensitive, submissive, inward twin, Beverly, without the women ever knowing they are sleeping with a different man.
It's a monstrous violation of consent.
It is, but to the twins, it's just how they maintain their unified existence. But when Beverly falls genuinely, desperately in love with an actress who is one of their patients, the emotional asymmetry it creates in their perfect, hermetically sealed twin dynamic begins to completely unravel and destroy them both.
The film is a sustained, agonizing meditation on the horror of individuation. Think about the sheer psychological terror of suddenly having to become a single, bounded, isolated self when you have spent your entire life operating as half of a shared organism.
They don't know how to be alone.
They don't know where Elliot ends and Beverly begins.
Hmm.
And here again, we see Cronenberg's brilliant architectural philosophy at work. Look at the spaces they inhabit.
Right, the clinic.
The sterile, gleaming white, hyper-modern aesthetic of their gynecological clinic, and the bizarre, organic, terrifyingly mutant medical instruments that a descending Beverly starts custom making for his mutant women. These spaces and these cold metal objects are physical externalizations of their internal rot.
The pristine clinic perfectly reflects the descent and fracturing of their shared mind.
Precisely.
I honestly argue, whenever I talk about his movies, that Dead Ringers is the most deeply terrifying film Cronenberg ever made, specifically because there is absolutely no external sci-fi trigger.
No flies, no TVs?
There's no teleportation pod malfunction, there's no pirate video signal from a satellite, there's no rogue parasite engineered by a mad scientist. The mutation that destroys the mental twins is entirely internal. It is purely psychological.
It comes from within.
It is born from the everyday, relatable terror of just trying to be a single individual human being in a lonely world.
That is a crucial insight. The horror is the creeping, inescapable discovery that neither twin can actually exist without the other. They are a single organism occupying two bodies.
It's tragic.
And so their mutual destruction can only go inward, collapsing upon itself, concluding in a devastating final act that is simultaneously a surgical murder and a suicide.
Wow.
This idea of internal mutation, of a hidden suppressed self violently rising to the surface and taking over the body, perfectly sets the stage for Cronenberg's massive stylistic pivot in the mid-2000s.
Which brings us to the era where the body keeps the score, looking deeply at a history of violence and Eastern promises.
A very different era.
This era really threw a lot of critics and audiences for a loop initially. In 2005, he releases A History of Violence, adapting a graphic novel. Viggo Mortensen plays Tom Stahl. He's this incredibly ordinary, mild-mannered, soft-spoken diner owner in a small, idyllic town in Indiana.
The perfect family man.
He's beloved by his community, he's happily married to his beautiful wife Edie, played by Maria Bello, and he has two normal kids. It is the quintessential Norman Rockwell, apple pie American life.
But it doesn't last.
But then, two violent, psychopathic criminals enter his diner at closing time and threaten his employees. And Tom instinctively, flawlessly kills them.
He doesn't even hesitate.
And he doesn't just nervously shoot them, he dismantles them with this sudden, hyper-efficient, expert brutality. It's shockingly fast.
It's jarring.
He survives, becomes a reluctant local hero on the news, but that national broadcast brings men from the Philadelphia mob to his quiet town, led by a menacing Ed Harris. They claim Tom Stahl isn't Tom Stahl at all. They claim he is Joey Cusack, a former extraordinarily violent mob enforcer from their past.
And Tom denies it?
Tom vehemently denies it. He plays the terrified civilian perfectly, but the tragedy is he's lying.
It looks like a completely conventional Hollywood thriller on the surface. The quiet man pushed too far.
Very familiar trope.
But when you look closely at the mechanics of the filmmaking, you see how Cronenberg completely subversively dismantles the mythology of the Hollywood revenge genre.
Explain how he does that.
Think about a normal action movie. When the peaceful hero is finally forced to reveal his violent past and take out the bad guys, it's celebrated by the camera. It's shot in slow motion, the music swells. It's the hero recovering his true badass identity to protect his family.
We cheer for John Wick.
Exactly. Cronenberg entirely refuses that cinematic celebration. When Tom's violence erupts in the diner or later on his lawn, it isn't cool. It isn't triumphant. It is genuinely stomach-churningly disturbing.
It feels ugly.
It is shot flatly, quickly, and devoid of heroic moral drama. It is the violence of a man for whom killing is simply a highly trained biological competency, like a carpenter hammering a nail.
I've heard this era of his work described as body horror without the mutation, and that makes perfect sense to me now.
It fits perfectly.
Tom Stahl's conscious mind, his soul, genuinely wants to be this peaceful family man. He loves his wife. But his physical body carries a dark history that his mind has desperately tried to deny and bury.
Muscle memory.
His reflexes, his muscle memory, his capacity for lethal violence. His body responds to the physical threat before his conscious brain even processes what's happening. The body remembers the violence it was trained to enact. The flesh carries its history regardless of what the mind wants.
Exactly. Conceptually, it's the exact same argument as Videodrome. The flesh is permanently modified by its past exposures. But here, it is executed in a grounded, realistic thriller without any science fiction elements.
So smart.
And the genius of the film is how this tension is visually argued through two highly discussed, contrasting sex scenes between Tom and his wife Edie.
Oh, yes. These are crucial to the film.
The first scene, early in the film before his secret is exposed, is playful, cheerful, deeply reciprocal. It's the warm, comforting sex of a happy, trusting marriage.
Very tender.
But the second scene, which happens on the exact same staircase after she definitively learns he is actually a ruthless killer, is completely radically different. It is brutal, it is aggressive, it is sadomasochistic, and the camera leaves it uncomfortably, deliberately unresolved as to whether it constitutes assault or dark form of consent.
So what does this all mean? Let's translate what that actually means for the characters. Those two scenes show how the body's relationship to violence and desire are inextricably, confusingly linked.
They can't be separated.
When Edie learns what her husband's physical body is actually capable of, that those hands making her coffee can crush a man's throat, her desire for him doesn't just vanish in moral outrage. Instead, her desire mutates into something much darker and more complicated.
Right, it's biological honesty.
And true to form, Cronenberg absolutely refuses to tell the audience what moral judgment to make of that uncomfortable truth. He just shows you the complex biological reality of human attraction.
Because refusing to neatly resolve that tension is the only honest position a filmmaker can take when dealing with human psychology.
I was thinking about Tom Stahl's violent reflexes, and the best way I can describe it is biological. It's not like uninstalling a computer program. It's like Tom has a dormant retrovirus embedded deep in his DNA.
I like that analogy.
He changed his environment, he moved to a quiet town, he ate healthy, he lived a peaceful life. So the virus stayed completely dormant for years.
Right.
But the extreme stress of that diner robbery was the environmental trigger that woke the virus up.
The trigger.
The violent protein started folding and activating before his conscious brain even knew he was infected again. And that makes me look at William Hurt's character, Richie, Tom's brother from the Philadelphia mob.
He's amazing in this.
William Hurt is in the movie for maybe 10 minutes and got an Oscar nomination for it because he's so bizarrely captivating. I have to ask you, is the true underlying tragedy of Tom Stahl that, unlike his brother Richie, who wears his violent sociopathic nature openly, comfortably, and joyfully, Tom's entire life as a small-town dad has just been an exhausting, decades-long, white-knuckle performance of pretending to be a normal organism?
I think the film heavily, tragically implies exactly that. Richie's open, almost relaxed embrace of his own monstrous nature exposes the sheer, crushing daily effort of concealment that has constituted Tom's entire adult life.
He's been pretending.
Tom has been holding his breath for 20 years, and the movie is about him finally exhaling. And this profound exploration of concealed identity and the body as a record of the past leads directly into the companion piece to this film, 2007's Eastern Promises.
Also starring Viggo Mortensen.
Also starring Viggo Mortensen, but this time he plays Nikolai, a driver and brutal enforcer for the Vori Vizakon, the Russian criminal underworld operating in London.
The conceptual innovation in Eastern Promises is just mind-blowing to me. Cronenberg takes the literal skin of the characters and turns it into a bureaucratic document.
He really does.
In this specific Russian criminal underworld, tattoos are not decorative art. They aren't aesthetic choices you make at a parlor. They are a highly codified, rigid documentary text.
You have to earn them.
They are a comprehensive, readable record of a man's crimes, the specific prisons he has served time in, his allegiances, and his exact rank in the mob hierarchy. Every star, every cross, every mark means something highly specific to whoever is reading it. The body literally becomes a living document.
But as we know, with any document, with any piece of text, it can be forged. It can be a lie.
And that is the crux of the narrative. Mortensen's character, Nikolai, is covered in these intricate tattoos, and the film deliberately withholds their true interpretation from the audience until a late, shocking revelation.
You think you know who he is?
For most of the film, you think you're reading his character clearly based on his actions and his ink. He appears to be a loyal, ruthless, amoral mobster climbing the ranks, but then the ground shifts underneath you.
It's a huge twist.
The text inscribed on his body was actually a narrative strategy. The most permanent, intimate documentation possible, ink, inscribed deep into human skin with needles, turns out to be a performative costume worn by the flesh to hide his true identity as an undercover agent.
And the absolute culmination of this idea of biological honesty happens in the famous bathhouse sequence. It is, and I don't think there's any debate about this, one of the greatest, most visceral action scenes of the 21st century.
It's incredible.
Nikolai is ambushed in a Russian steam bath by two Chechen assassins armed with curved linoleum knives. And Nikolai is completely, totally naked for the entire fight.
And we have to look at how Peter Sashitsky shoots the scene with total, unblinking clinical realism.
Again, no shaky cam.
There is no sweeping, exciting action music to pump up the audience. The lighting is flat, harsh, and unforgiving. The choreography is clumsy and desperate, not slick martial arts.
They are just slicking around.
And the sound design is hyper-realistic. You hear the squeak of bare skin on wet tile, the heavy, exhausted breathing, the awful, meaty sounds of a blade puncturing flesh. It completely removes all the traditional tools of comfortable cinematic viewing.
Let's analyze why that nakedness is so deeply Cronenbergian. It's not just for shock value.
No, not at all.
Think about it. When Nikolai is walking around London in his tailored double-breasted suit, he is a persona. He is constructed, he is protected, and he is legible to society.
He's playing a role.
He's the mob enforcer.
But when he is naked, bleeding, slipping on wet tile, fighting like a cornered animal for his life, all social identity is violently stripped away. We see the raw, undeniable biological fact of what he is. An organism trying to survive.
That's all he is in that moment.
And the tragic biological fact, when you look at him covered in those mob tattoos, reveals that his flesh is utterly owned by an institution. The tattoos are literal ownership marks, like branding cattle. He doesn't even own his own body. The state, the undercover operation, the mob, they own his flesh.
It is a profound, deeply cynical realization about institutional power over human biology. The institutions write their power directly onto our skin.
Thank you.
And this relentless, uncompromising 60-year interrogation of the body, violence, and identity didn't just stay confined to Cronenberg's own filmography.
Yeah.
It didn't just make a bunch of weird movies in a vacuum.
No. His influence is everywhere. His vision leaked out into the culture, and it infected the rest of the cinematic world. Which brings us to the Cronenberg effect and the massive legacy of his vision.
You literally cannot look at modern cinema without seeing his DNA spliced into everywhere.
Totally.
If you track the massive wave of what critics call elevated horror that took over the 2010s, directors like Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, and most directly, the French director Julia Ducournau.
Oh, absolutely.
Her films, like Raw and the Palme d'Or-winning Titane, are operating entirely unapologetically in the exact territory Cronenberg opened up. Titane, a movie about a woman who has a titanium plate in her head and gets impregnated by a car, is essentially the film that Cronenberg's 1996 movie Crash described at the level of pure idea, just realized 4 decades later, with modern kinetic energy.
He paved the way for that.
Cronenberg created the intellectual space for horror that takes the physical body seriously as a site of deep philosophical meaning.
And his influence extends far, far beyond pure horror. Look at the clinical, unaestheticized, deeply disturbing violence we see in Denis Villeneuve's mainstream thrillers films like Prisoners or Sicario.
Yes, the Villeneuve connection is strong.
That cold, precise, objective camera work that refuses to celebrate the violence of the cartel or the police, that is a direct, undeniable inheritance from the diner scene in Cronenberg's A History of Violence.
Completely.
Furthermore, the entire modern subgenre of biopunk science fiction owes him an unpayable debt. The deep anxieties about the boundary between the biological human and the digital avatar that defined the Matrix trilogy, or the seamless integration of future tech into artificial flesh seen in Alex Garland's Ex Machina Cronenberg, articulated all of that years earlier in films like Existence Z and Videodrome. He built the vocabulary they all use.
And we have to talk about the musical legacy, because this point genuinely blew my mind when I made the connection in the source text.
Wait, really? The
Okay.
music?
Yes. Howard Shore's orchestrally rich, harmonically complex scores, the ones he spent 25 years building to sound like biological wrongness for Cronenberg's mutants, that exact specific musical language became the foundational approach for large-scale fantasy cinema.
You're kidding.
Most notably, Shore took that exact DNA and used it to write the iconic Oscar-winning scores for the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Oh, wow.
When you hear the dark, brooding brass and the dissonant strings of the Uruk-hai or Gollum's theme, you are hearing the descendants of the Fly and Dead Ringers.
That is insane.
Realizing that means we've all been sitting in multiplex theaters, eating popcorn, listening to a subtle, invisible form of audio body horror for decades without even knowing it. He smuggled the sound of organic mutation right into the heart of Middle-earth.
It's entirely true. The influence is so pervasive, it has become almost invisible to the average viewer. And what makes this legacy so remarkable is that it isn't just historical. It isn't a retrospective. It is an active, ongoing practice.
He's still making films.
In 2022, at the age of 79, Cronenberg released a new film called Crimes of the Future, deliberately sharing a title with his 1970 experimental film, completing a massive 60-year artistic circle.
Perfect bookend.
It's a film set in a world where human bodies are spontaneously growing new unclassified organs, and where performance art surgery has become the new sexuality. At almost 80 years old, he is still ruthlessly pursuing the exact same questions about flesh and environment that he was asking when he was a 26-year-old biology dropout.
Which brings up the most vital pressing question. Why does David Cronenberg matter now? Why should someone listening to this deep dive go back and watch these unsettling movies today?
Well, there are two urgent answers to that. The first is purely technological. Everything Cronenberg warned us about, everything he theorized, real-time biometric monitors feeding our data to corporations, pharmaceutical interventions fundamentally altering our cognition, gene editing rewriting our DNA, AI blurring the lines of what constitutes biological intelligence. Our daily reality has finally caught up to his 1980s prophecies.
We are undeniably currently living inside the new flesh.
Exactly. The second answer is the concept of epistemic honesty or moral honesty. Contemporary prestige films and television shows love to spoon-feed audiences comfortable, neat moral conclusions. They want you to know who the good guy is.
Cronenberg completely refuses to do that.
He trusts the audience with profound discomfort. He sits comfortably in irresolution. And engaging with that kind of epistemic honesty better equips our minds to deal with an incredibly complex, morally gray real world much better than films that pretend the disturbing realities of human experience can be neatly resolved in 2 hours.
I have to ask, though, wait, let me phrase it this way before we wrap up. Is this exact moral honesty, this refusal to spoon-feed us, the real reason why people find Cronenberg so deeply unsettling?
I think so, yes.
I mean, it's not just the gore. There are plenty of incredibly gory slasher movies that are ultimately comforting to watch because the bad guy gets defeated, the final girl survives, and moral order is restored to the universe.
The status quo is maintained.
But Cronenberg refuses to pat the audience on the head. He refuses to look at the camera and tell us, everything's going to be okay. He tells us, your body is changing. The technology is already inside you. The world is mutating. And there's absolutely no going back to the way things were.
That complete lack of resolution is terrifying to a society that constantly craves easy answers.
It is deeply terrifying. But being unsettled is a useful state. Being unsettled strips away your complacency. It makes you more fully aware of the complexity of what you are and what it truly means to live inside a vulnerable, mutating body in a world that never stops trying to reshape it.
We've covered an unbelievable amount of ground today, from a young analytical biology student staring into a microscope in a Toronto lab to the conceptual invention of the new flesh.
It's been a massive journey.
We've traced his prophetic, unnerving warnings about algorithmic media in Videodrome, the deeply tragic emotional devastation of terminal illness in The Fly, the internal wars of hidden identity playing out in Viggo Mortensen's nervous system, and the massive, inescapable cultural legacy he has left imprinted on modern cinema.
He is a filmmaker who holds the very unusual and somewhat terrifying distinction of having been right about the future consistently for over 60 years.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a lingering thought experiment, building off of his late career triumph, Crimes of the Future.
Oh, this is a good one.
In that film, human bodies are spontaneously developing new, entirely unknown biological organs to deal with the synthetic world. I want you to look down at the smartphone in your hand right now, or the smartwatch tracking your pulse on your wrist.
Have a look at it.
If the technology you consume every single day, the specific algorithms you feed your time and attention to, was slowly, quietly growing a brand new, invisible, physical organ inside your mind right now, what exact function would that organ serve?
What is it processing?
And if you found out it was there, pulsing away, would you choose to surgically remove it, or would you let it take over? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Long live the new flesh.